All right, good evening. Tonight we're learning Maseches, Eruvin Daf Tzadi Ches. Our last, today's Sunday? It's not our last Sunday. It's our second to last Sunday of the Daf. We have about 15 people signed up for Emir Hashem, a beautiful siyum. Tonight's the night. If you have yet to sign up, please let me know by the end of the day. We're putting in all the orders and looking forward, Emir Hashem, to celebrating and as well starting Maseches Psachim next Monday. Let's get started. We're on the bottom of Tzadi Zayin Amud Beis. We're starting at the Mishnah 7 lines from the bottom, and we will be going to Tzadi Ches Amud Beis to the Mishnah at 10 lines from the bottom. Two Mishnayos, two clean Mishnayos, and
so the number in the middle.
Together. Here we go. Person is sitting on an iskupa. We don't yet know what an iskupa is. It's some type of porch of some kind. We don't know if it's Rishus HaYachid or Rishus HaRabim. And remember that their books were like a scroll, not like our Sifrei Torah that are on two Atzei Chaim, but like usually they were just on one. You'd kind of like pull up one end to be able to read it, and then you'd roll it back up when you were done. But all typically on one. So you're reading it, and unfortunately, part of it rolls away from you. So what is the din on Shabbos? Because now you're in a different rishus. So the halacha is gololo etzlo. You can roll it back up to you. That's by any skupa. What about hayakori barosh hagag b'nisgal gel sefer miyado? You're on top of a roof and you are reading on a roof, and the sefer rolls out, and you're still holding the other end. So then here we have a machlokes in the Tanoim. Ad shelo higia la'asar tvachim. If the sefer rolls, but it is not within 10 tvachim from the ground, 12 tvachim from the ground, gololo etzlo, then you can roll it back up. Mishehigia la'asar tvachim. But once it gets down to asar tvachim, then you have to be hofcho al haksab. You have to flip it over so that the writing side is now facing the building, and the parchment side, the back side of the parchment, is facing outward. That's considered to be more mechubad, as we'll see in the Gemara. That's the sheet of the Tanakama. So above 10 tvachim, you can roll it back up. Below 10 tvachim, you're hofcho al haksab. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, 4 lines from the bottom, Tzadi Zayin Amud Beis, he says, afilu ein mesulak min haaretz elakim lo machat gololo etzlo. As long as there's any airspace, even as thin as a needle, then that way a person would then be able to still roll it up. That's considered not being on the ground. And Reb Shimon is the most lenient of them all. Reb Shimon Omer, afilu ba'aretz atzmo gololo etzlo. I don't care what's going on. 10 tvachim, forget it. 1 machat, nothing. Even if it's laying on the ground at the bottom, you're still allowed to be gololo. You're allowed to roll it up. Why? A very important principle. She'ein lecha davar mishum shvus omed bifnei kisvei hakodesh. No dine derabanan get in the way of kisvei hakodesh. Seemingly a very wide berth klal to say out loud. We see its application here. Good shaila what its applications are in other places. But in this case, what it means is that it's better to be golel the ksab than it is, for example, to be hofech the ksab. Why doesn't he offer that as an option? Reb Shimon doesn't like that option because when it comes to kisvei hakodesh, we don't allow for a shvus to stand in our way.
What qualifies
as
kisvei hakodesh?
That's a great question. I'm presuming here that it's speaking about Tanakh. I'm just guessing. I mean, maybe Rashi. I didn't even look into that. Does Rashi say what the kisvei hakodesh is? Hayikore. So Rashi, 7 lines from the bottom. Kol hasvarm ha'asuyin. Oh, that's just speaking about the structure of them. I'll have to look into it. I don't know the answer to that. Don't know. I presume it's Tanakh oriented. What?
Our scripture says scripture.
Yeah.
The Holy Scripture.
Right. So the Mishnah here, it mentions an iskupa, though the details of what an iskupa is a little ambiguous because we don't know what an iskupa is in halachic terms. So that's going to be our analysis here. We're going to see 3 different versions, and in one of the versions, 2 variations on the theme. Let's get started as to what an iskupa is. Hi, iskupa hichidami. When the Mishnah says that there's an iskupa where you're standing and reading, and part of the book you're reading falls off, so then the Mishnah said with no arguments that by an iskupa it's gololo etzlo. What's the case? What's the case of the iskupa? Where are you standing? So then says the Gemara, answer number 1, it's nameless. We don't have an Amora's name here. If you're standing on, let's say, a private porch in your house, whatever it is, and v'kama rishus harabim, and in front of you, the space where the book is golel is a rishus harabim, and v'logaz rinan dilma nafil v'asi la'asuye. Here, clearly, we don't have a concern that you might drop it because what did we say the din was in the Mishnah? That you roll it up. If we were concerned that you might drop it, we would have said hofcho al haksab, that you should flip it around. We didn't say that. So by virtue of the fact that the iskupa is a case that's a rishus hayachid, and the outside where it fell beyond the fence that you're standing at, beyond the little space that you're in is a Rishus Harabim, it's clear that there's no Gzeira. Here, money, top of Tzadi Ches Manal, whose Shita is that? That is the Shita of Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon, he the Amar kol davar shumi shum shvus eno omed bifnei kisvei hakodesh. The Reisha, the first part of the Mishnah, the Iskupa, seems to be like the sheet of Reb Shimon, that we don't allow for Isurei Derabanan to interfere with Kisvei HaKodesh, so you'd be allowed to roll it up, seemingly no matter what, because the case of the Iskupa doesn't have any distinctions about 10 tefachim, 1 tefach, nothing. The case of the Iskupa, if you look back at the first line of our Mishnah, just go lo et slow. Seemingly, no matter what the circumstances, you roll it back up, and that is the sheet of Reb Shimon. So says the Gemara, but wait a minute. Second line, if that's true, look at the rest of our Mishnah. The rest of our Mishnah then quotes Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Omer afilu ein mesulak min haaretz elamacha elamalo hachut go lo et slow. There we saw the shita of Rabbi Yehuda that if there is a machat, if there is a distance of even a needle from the ground, we said go lo. And then again, Rabbi Shimon Omer. Then again, it says Rabbi Shimon Omer afilu ba'aretz atma go lo et slow. So the Gemara is bothered by that. The skupa was the case of Reb Shimon, and then we have Rabbi Yehuda, and we have Reb Shimon again. So it says the Gemara, Reisha v'Seifa, Reb Shimon, Mitziasa, Rabbi Yehuda. This is like a discombobulated, disorganized Mishnah. Write everything in the sheet of Reb Shimon, and then go back and speak about Rabbi Yehuda, vice versa. But the way that it's structured now is Reb Shimon, and then Rabbi Yehuda, and then Reb Shimon. So says the Gemara, I'm not sure I understand what the problem is. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, no problem at all. And by the way, this Amar Rav Yehuda is the Amora, just to be clear. It's not can't be talking about himself here. This question was raised later. And the answer is no problem at all. Yes, Reisha v'Seifa, Reb Shimon, Mitziasa, Reb Yehuda. So this is our first viable answer. The Reisha is talking about Reb Shimon. The Seifa is talking about Reb Shimon. And in the middle, we have Reb Yehuda. What's the case? The case is where the Iskupa is treated as a Rishus HaYachid, and he drops it into a Rishus HaRab. That's case number one. Possibility number one. Here's possibility number two. Rabba Amar, Hacha be'iskupa hanidresas askinan. Here we're talking about a space where there are a lot of people that walk in that space. It's a Rishus HaYachid, Rashi writes, but it kind of gets ruined by the people that are trampling on it. Mishum bizayon kisvei hakodesh sharu rabbanan. And here the reason why the rabbis were being much more lenient than they would have been is because we're just concerned about the people who are walking by. That bizon could cause for problems. So we don't make any distinctions about how far down it falls. In the iskupa, under all circumstances, go lo et slow, you would roll it up. Esive, the Gemara says against Rabbi, Esive Abaye, wait a minute, toch dalet amos go lo et slow, chutz ledalet hovcho alaksav. We do see a distinction in this case, or we should see a distinction in this case of dalet amos, where if it's a place that's nidreses, then we should see a distinction of Dalet Amos where you are Gola Letzlo. But if it's outside of Dalet Amos, then Hovcho Alaksav. But if you want to say that, like Rabbi does, that our Mishnah is dealing with an Iskupa Nidreses, with a space where people kind of walk all over the place, Mali Toch Dalet Amos, Mali Chutza Arba Amos. We don't see a distinction in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah shows no distinction of Dalet Amos, but there's a brisa which indicates that we should see a difference of Dalet Amos, but it's not mentioned in our Mishnah. Manavshach, so it doesn't work. So therefore, the Gemara says we're going to reject Rabbah. So now answer number one was viable. Answer number two was Rabbah who just got rejected. Ela Amar Abaye, Hacha, what are we dealing with? We're not dealing with the Nidresas case. Ela Hacha, Biskupa Carmelis Askinan. We're dealing with an Iskupa that has a status midrabanan of a Carmelis. The Rishus Harabim overes lefaneha, and there is a Rishus Harabim right in front of where you are. There we add in the Brisa's distinction, Toch Dalet Amos. There we would say Toch Dalet Amos that we have a concern. Inafil umaisile lo asili de chiyuchatos, that if it's from the Carmelis and it doesn't fall far away from you, so then there's no chiyuchatos there. Sharule rabbanan, that's not a problem. However, chutz le'arba amos, if in fact the sefer fell 4 amos away from you, there you're now bringing from the Rishus Harabim into a Carmelis. That's an Isser Doraisa. You're not allowed to do that. So then, Lo Sharu Le Rabbanan, and this factors in that Brisa of the Dalet Amos. And now the Iskupa Carmelis, the answer of Abaye, seems to make sense. Machlokas in the Girser, do we say Ihachi or not? Well, we'll say it because it flows nicely. Ihachi, if what you're saying is true, but we should still have an Isser Derabanan of Toch Dalet Amos, Nami Nigzar. We should still have the Isser Derabanan within, when it's only within Dalet Amos, because that's what Gzera Derabanan is. It's the step before Gzera Deraisa. So why don't we have an Isser Derabanan here? So says the Gemara, Dilma me'ayel me'rishus harabim l'rishus hayachid. We're afraid that maybe one will in fact violate the Isser Doraisa of carrying from a rishus harabim to a rishus hayachid. Says the Gemara, V'chitema kevan de Maseches karmelis les lanba. Maybe we'll say that because there's a karmelis in between, we don't have to worry so much. Says the Gemara, that's not true. Ve'amar Rabba taught us a din many hundred plus blot ago. Where was this? Oh, it was in this Masechta? No, it's later on and in Shabbos somewhere. Wow. That's Daf Ches, going all the way back. The Amar Rava said, "Hamavir chayfetz mitchilas arba l'sof arba v'he'eviru derech alav chayit." Rava says that if you carry from the beginning of Dalet Amos to the end and you cross through a Carmelis, Isser Doraisa. So you can't tell me here that because there's a Carmelis that it lowers the status of the Isser Doraisa, because it doesn't. Rava says it's the same Isser Doraisa. Namely, why don't we have a Gzera Derabanan on the first Dalet Amos? Why don't we have that Gzera Derabanan? Halfway down, Sadi Ches Medalef answers the Gemara, Hacha b'maya skin, and two possible answers to this question from Rava. Be'iskupa arucha. The iskupa is a very, very long iskupa. It's very deep, and we just assume adahachi v'hachi midkar, that while you're carrying the scroll back, you're going to remember not to bring it all the way into the house, and you'll stop somewhere in the middle. And the iskupa arucha is a solution to our problem, and that keeps Abaye's answer alive. Ibaisema, second possibility. Lo'olam bi-iskupa she'enu arucha. It's really not. But, and here's our hashkafa musar for the day. V'stam kisvei hakodesh. When you pick up a sefer, you can't help yourself. You flip it open, you read the Hakdama, you read something, the table of contents, you read who the author was, and then you'll stop in the Carmelis in the middle and everything will be okay. Very frum. It's a very beautiful idea. You're going to stop. You're not going to do a full carry. Says the Gemara, maybe you'll stop and look at it while you're in the Rishus Harabim and not stop in the Carmelis. Who says you're going to stop in the Carmelis? Yes, you're going to pick up the book right there and start looking at it. Absolutely, you're going to look at it, but maybe you won't stop in the Carmelis. It says the Gemara, Hamani. The Gemara says, Hamani, who is this opinion like? This is like the opinion of Ben Azai. Hamani Ben Azai, what does he say? To Amar, Mehalech Ka'ome Dami. This is a very, very dramatic shita within the realm of walking, which is that walking is as if you're standing. So if I walk from a Rishus Harabim through a Carmelis into a Rishus Hayachid, because Mahalach is Ka'ome Dami, it's as if I stopped at every step. Every step is a stop, which means I stopped even in the Carmelis, which means that there's no direct transfer from the Rishus Rabim to the Rishus Hayachid when going through a Carmelis, because he holds that every step is a stop. You can't really, it's hard to violate the Isser of walking through a Carmelis directly holding something. Can't violate the Isser. And that's why there's no Gzera Derabanan on the Dalet Amos. Says the Gemara, V'dilma Zarek Lehu Mizrach. Maybe we should be concerned that even according to Ben Azai says, you're right, Mahalach is Ka'ome Dami, so therefore we assume it's as if you stopped in the Carmelis. But Ben Azai also agrees that if you throw something, that throwing is not like Ka'ome Dami. This is the sugya that we learned many months ago of Kluta Kimei Shehun Chadamya. When we throw something, is it as if it landed? So it says the Gemara, V'dilma Zarek Lehu Mizrach. Maybe we can throw it to Amar of Yochanan. Mod Ben Azai Bezorek. Ben Azai agrees that if you throw something from a Rishus Harabim through a Carmelis or Rishus Yachid, that's an Isur Daraisa. So says the Gemara, Amar Ravacha Bar Ava, the fact that we don't see that answer, Zosameres, in Mizarkin Kisvei HaKodesh. We don't throw Svarim. It's not appropriate to do so. Big shilas in the poskim about buying Svarim through the mail, and people sometimes do throw the boxes. How do you have to wrap them? Some poskim speak about this. You have to double wrap it to make sure that they're not throwing the sefer, they're throwing the box, these multiple wrappings to make sure. Putting Svarim in suitcases, under airplanes, similar types of shilas, because they may throw them. We don't throw them. That's our assumption that it's considered a bizayon. That brings us to the two dots, about 3/4 of the way down on Sariches Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, Hayakore Bagag, Hayakore Barosh Hagag. What was this case talking about? So there we said, if you're being Kore Barosh Hagag and the sefer falls out, so then one of the options was to be Hofcho al Haksav, was to flip it over so that the text of the parchment is not facing outwards, but rather inwards. Says the Gemara, Umi Shari, are we allowed to do that? Are we allowed to put the ksav face down? V'atanya, the Brisa writes, Kosvei Svarim Tfilin Umizozos, this is Stam, the acronym of Stam, Svarim Tfilin Umizozos, Lo Hitir Lehen Lahafoch Yiriya Al Paneha. You're not allowed to put the parchment, a strip of the parchment, you're not allowed to put it face down. Ella, Pores Ales Abege. By the way, with the Sefer Torah, why don't we just flip the Torah upside down between the liyas? we know that when we're making a mishaberach, it's considered appropriate to cover the Sefer Torah. But in theory, we could flip it upside down. Says the Gemara, no, you can't. That's not appropriate. You're not allowed to flip it upside down, and it's better to cover it. So this is what the Brisa says. You're not supposed to be hofech. You should rather cover it. So answers the Gemara, hasam efshar. That's where you have a possibility of doing that. What are you going to do? You've got 40 feet of parchment rolled off the side of your roof. What are you going to do? But hachalo efshar. Lo apich ikab bizayon kisvei kodesh tvei. I can't cover it with a garment. And if I can't cover it with a garment, it's more of a bizayon to have the text facing out than it is to have the text facing in. So we should flip it over. So this led to a shaila in the posting about taking a sefer like this and flipping it upside down. So one of my Rabbi said over there is we should try not to do that. Take a tissue as a little, or whatever, have a string just to close it, and those kinds of things to make sure that it is in a more kadosh way than flipping the book upside down. Next two dots, Hofcho al Aksab, says the Gemara, Hofcho al Aksab. What was going on in the Gemara there, in the Mishnah there? So they look at the Mishnah, 6 lines from the bottom, 5 lines from the bottom. It says, Mihishihigia le'asar tfachim. When you are 10 tfachim from the ground, Hofcho al Aksab, you should flip over the parchment so that the parchment is now face in. Says the Gemara, V'halo nach. But why would you do that? It's not even on the ground yet. Why are you saying now to flip it over? You could still roll it up. It's not even resting on the ground. Amar Rava, we saw this Gemara as well many blot ago. Amar Rava bekosel meshupa. We're talking about a roof that is slanted. So when my parchment is rolling out, it's actually leaning on a roof on a slight angle. It's not laying down, just hanging. It's actually laying on something. And that's why, in that case, we were no longer able to roll it up because now it's nach. Now it's resting on something. So what can we do? Halo efshar, we can't roll it up because that's an isur d'Rabbanan. We have to be hofech. We have to flip it on the ksav. Fine. Says the Gemara, Amar le Abaye b'mayu kimta lemasnisan. You just said that our Mishnah has been established by Kosel Meshupa, that our Mishnah is now discussing a case of a slanted roof. But if that's true, then I don't understand the Seifa. Ema Seifa, 4 lines from the bottom, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Afilu einu mesulak min haaretz elam alo hachud gololo etzlo. There we saw the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda that even if there's 1 needle's difference from the bottom of the ksav to the ground, you're golel. But you just said it was on a roof. Says the Gemara, v'hanachle. It's leaning on the roof. You said it was meshupa. So which one is it? How is Rabbi Yehuda holding? Says the Gemara, you're correct. You're correct. There is a mistake here. This is the appropriate way to understand our Gemara. Before I give that answer, I see that someone asked a question. Hold on. What daf are we on? Oh, okay, very good. We're at the very bottom of Tzadi Chesam and Aleph. Here is what the Brisa should have said. What is our Mishnah? Not the Brisa, excuse me. What is our Mishnah supposed to be saying? Really, it's talking about Bekosel Meshupa. Really, we're talking about a roof that when your sefer rolls off of the roof, that there's a slight lean of the building, and it's not actually resting, just hanging in the air. It's actually slightly leaning on the ground. Very good. Bekosel Meshupa. Aval, however, Bekosel She'eno Meshupa, when the wall is not slanted, namely when the parchment is just literally hanging by gravity, swaying in the wind. Lama mishlosha. This is a new shir. This is a new brisa. Lama mishlosha gololo etzlo. When it's above 3 tfachim, so then you can bring it back up. Lamata mishlosha hofcho al aksab. When it's below 3 tfachim because of lavud. So Rashi, top Rashi, lamata mishlosha higia rosha sefer l'shlosha samach lekarka. Ara smichtahu v'harehu kimunach. Classical rules of lavud. It's basically like it's part of the ground. Because it's part of the ground, so therefore you should be hofcho al aksab. Then it's not appropriate to roll it up. You should rely on the leniency of hofcho al aksab. These 2 dots are removed by the Meforshim. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, in the same context, he gives his lenient shita that it has to actually be resting on something. Namely, Rabbi Yehuda is arguing with the shita of lavud. He doesn't argue about the principle of lavud. He's saying this isn't about lavud. If the ksav is not, if the parchment is not resting on the ground, you can be golel. So that's how he argues. It says the Gemara, wait a second. We have a Mar Makom that says from Rabba that if it's within 3, it does need a hanacha. Maybe we should say there's a machlokas amoraim. Should we say there's a machlokas tanoim here? Answers the Gemara with another pivot. Ella kula Rabbi Yehuda. Really, there's a combination of shitas here that belong to Rabbi Yehuda. V'chasure mechsar v'hachitani. Here is yet a better understanding, and this will bring us to the next Mishnah. B'medvarim amurim b'kosel meshupa. We are in fact talking about a kosel meshupa, about a slanted roof, where when your parchment rolls off out of your hands, you're holding one end. but it's kind of leaning against the roof. However, aval b'kosel she'ena meshupa, when it's just a straight wall, and in fact the parchment is simply hanging in the wind, afilu pachos mishlosha tvachim gola lo etzlo, even if it's less than 3 tvachim, your gola letzlo. Sheb Yehuda Omer afilu eina mesuluk min aras el malo hachut gola lo etzlo. So namely, we remove the shita that when it's within 3 tvachim, that we are hofcho, that we don't hold. When you're within 3 tvachim, you're gololo, you roll it up, you don't flip it around. The only time, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that we would be hofcho is when it's literally resting on the ground. My taima, what's the reason why? Is because in order to trigger the leniency of hofcho, it's not the right kavod. The right kavod is to pull the sefer back up to where it was. When, says Rabbi Yehuda, are we going to be lenient? My taima, because deboinan hanocha al gabe mashu. Once the parchment is resting on something, then we have to say hofcho al aksav. But if it's hanging in the air, even if it's just a machat's worth off of the ground, then it's considered enough. So what we've learned, b'sikum hadvarim here, is a couple of viable shitas as to what an iskupa is. Basically 2 options. Either, as we started on the bottom of Tzadi Zayin, it's a Rishus HaYachid and it's hanging over into a Rishus HaRabim, or the second version that we learned that was viable, the Shita Rabbi, is that it's like a Carmelis, a couple of other small sugyas therein to make sure that we made a new kimt in our mission as well, that it's Meshupa under certain circumstances and not Meshupa under other circumstances, and the Shulchan Aruch codifies accordingly to a lot of these compromises that the Gemara made. Says the Gemara as follows, 1/3 of the way down, Tzadi Chesed Beis, we'll be stopping at the next Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Ziz Shalifnei Achalon, you have a protrusion outside of your window. So the din is, says the Mishnah, Nosnin alav v'notlin mimenu b'Shabbos. You're allowed to put things out there and take them back in. So says the Gemara, Hi Ziz demafik lehecha. Where is this Ziz? Where is this protrusion from your window pointing to? What's outside? Says the Gemara, if the space outside your window is a Rishus HaRabim, then lechush dilma nafil va'asi le'isuye. Then I should have a gzeira derabanan, that I should not be able to use the ziz, this protrusion, because what might happen? It might fall, and then I might carry this classical gzeira derabanan. So if the outside is a Rishus HaRabim, then I should not be allowed to use the ziz. What's the Mishnah talking about then? And then says Gemara, El demafik l'rishus hayachid. What? The outside is a rishus hayachid. It can't be the outside is a rishus hayachid, because then pshita. Then that's obvious that that's mutter to you. Then I don't need a Mishnah. Why would the Mishnah tell me that I'm allowed to use the ziz? Thank you. It's a rishus hayachid. It's like going into my yard on Shabbos. No problem at all. Amar Abaye gives pshat in our Mishnah. La'olam demafi kelim. Abaye Amar Abaye la'olam demafik l'rishus harabim. Really, the ziz, the protrusion, is hanging over the rishus harabim. Umay nosnin alav diktani. What did the Mishnah mean when it says nosnin alav? Only a specific type of utensil. Kelim hanishbarim, things that are fragile. Why? Because when they fall, you won't go get them because they broke. So when you have things that don't break, you can't use them. So let's say a wood utensil, which is very unlikely to break from a fall. Assuming it depends what's underneath, depends on the wood. Let's say any utensil that's not likely to fall. So then then you're not allowed to use that. We had a guest visiting our house, and their young child saw a picture of ours sitting in the yard. And he said out loud, I wonder if this is made out of glass. And he threw it up as high as he could on my basketball court to see if it was made out of glass. And it was made out of shatterproof plastic. So it bounced around and nothing happened to it. It was perfectly fine. That would be usher to put on your ziz if the outside of your window would be Rishus HaRabim. And I'm really glad it was a plastic pitcher, because this kid was just doing a science experiment outside. So that's not allowed here. What is allowed is something that will break, because then there's no concern. The Gzeira Derabanan about Asi Le'isuye, that I'm going to go, the kli fell, I'm going to go. There is no concern like that, because when this kli falls, it's going to break. Good. Kalim Hanishparim. These 2 dots don't belong either. A lot of 2 dots mistakes today in the Gemara. Tanya Namihachi, the brisa that supports this. Ziz Shalifnei Achalon Hayotze L'Rishus HaRabim, our Mishnah, although it adds in the words L'Rishus HaRabim. Nosnin alav, what are we allowed to put there? Explaining our Mishnah effectively, though it's its own brisa. Says Ke'aros, Uvikosos, Ketonios, Vitzluchios. Things that we normally eat with, things that are presumably fragile. This brisa continues, even though we have our proof points, the brisa continues with the following. You're allowed to use this wall outside your window until you get within 10 tefachim of the ground. And if there's 2 protrusions, one below your window and one above, then mishtamesh bo, then you use the lower one. Uve'elyon ein mishtamshin bo ela keneged chalono. And the one that's higher up, the protrusion that's above, you can reach both, but the one that's above, that's the one that you should not use. Uve'elyon ein mishtamshin bo ela keneged chalono, only opposite your window. What is exactly the metzias here with these 2 protrusions? Why is it that you can use only the lower one, and the top one you can only use opposite your window? What is happening here? Says the Gemara, this is not some magical halachic construct. It's very simple. Hi Ziz, hey Chidami, what's going on with these protrusions? If there isn't dalid, then it's a makom tur, and then a strange thing happens in the Gemara. Why? It's a makom tur. Makom tur is a very lenient space. So Rashi here teaches us a very important principle. This Rashi is below a few inches. Dibur hamaschil. Rashi is bothered by the fact that normally a makom tur is a place of leniency. Why here are you saying that if it's a makom tur, lo yishtamesh? So if you look about 4 lines into Rashi, Rashi says, Mihu tashmish tadir lo mishtarabe. We're not allowed to use a makom tur for a tashmish tadir, for a regular, you can use it bein lebein, you can use it every once in a while. But if the space that's a makom tur is going to be that which is outside your window, you cannot use it because you're not allowed to use a makom tur ba'ofen tadir in a way that's regular. Very unique. This whole Masechta and Maseches Shabbos, every time we've heard of a makom tur, it's been a kula. And here he says if your protrusion is a makom tur, you're not allowed. Why? Because outside your window, you can reach every day. You're going to use it all the time. So says Rashi, we have a yesod that by makom tur, it only applies when it's being done in an episodic way. But if it's being done on the regular, that is not allowed. So back in the Gemara, it says he's either lesbe arba. If the protrusion is not quite 4, then it's a makom tur. Because we can't use a makom tur ba'ofen tadir in a way which is regular. Isbe arba, then bekuli kosa lishtamish. And if in fact the protrusion is dalid, if it's 4, then we should be allowed to use the whole wall. So what exactly is the case in this brisa that we brought as a proof that the kelim are kelim nishbar? But what's the proof in this brisa? How does it work that you can use only the lower ziz, the lower protrusion, but the one that's above is only opposite your window? Answers the Gemara with a very simple answer. Amar Abaye, don't think so complicatedly. Everything is easy. Tachton to ispe arba. The lower one is in fact 4. That's why the lower one you are allowed to use, no problem at all. However, the elyon, really lesbe arba, really it's not 4 wide. Let's say it's only 3 deep, right? V'chalono mashlim tol arba. And your windowsill connects to this protrusion and makes it into 4. Therefore, keneged chalon mishtamesh techore chalonu. But when the upper protrusion is right opposite your window, the upper protrusion is only 3, but with your windowsill it's 4. Then you can use that space. The space right opposite your window is 4. However, dahai gisa, there we would say usher. So only opposite your window is 4, but to the right and to the left, dahai gisa, it's only 3 there because we don't have the added windowsill portion of your window to make it into 4, and therefore it would be usher. We'll stop here for tonight at the next Mishnah. We'll continue tomorrow night to learn Daf Tzadi Tes. Beautiful night.